There was always an empty chair at Sunday dinner. Turns out it had my name on it. But no one ever asked why I stopped coming. I'm 36 years old. My name is Elise Navarro. I've been a public school teacher for 14 years, and until recently, my family has never once called what I do a real career. They don't say it outright. They don't have to. You feel it in the pauses. The way my mother avoids mentioning me when bragging about her kids at church. The way my sister changes the subject when someone asks what I've been up to. The way my father used to sigh when I'd show up to family gatherings in my clearance rack blouses, worn soft at the elbows. But today, for the first time in 6 years, there's an empty chair at Sunday dinner that someone actually noticed. It wasn't set for me, of course. It was set for my brother Michael. He had to miss dinner last minute due to a crisis with the hedge fund. And in that small moment, my mom looked around the table, eyes flickering, and for once she asked, "Where's Elise?" No one answered. I'd stopped attending family dinners years ago, not out of anger, not at first, but out of exhaustion. There's only so many sideways remarks, so many veiled jokes about summer vacations and part-time work with full-time whining that a person can take. Especially when they're barely making rent teaching overcrowded classes of kids no one else seems to care about. Can I ask you something? Gently? When was the last time someone saw your quiet work as valuable? Not profitable, not flashy, just deeply human? If that resonates with you, maybe you'll take a moment to support this channel. Subscribe, leave a comment with where you're listening from, and what time it is over there. I'd love to know who's with me. Now, let's listen to my story journey. It starts, not with a moment of triumph, but a moment of silence. The kind that feels louder than yelling. I was 22 when I first told my family I'd been accepted into a teaching residency program in a tough inner-city district. I remember the kitchen was warm with late summer light, the kind that makes everything look a little golden even when it's tense. I was so proud. My hands were shaking as I held the acceptance letter. Dad looked at me over his glasses, leaned back in his chair and said, "So, you're turning down the internship with Vector Capital? The one your uncle worked so hard to set up for you?" I nodded, heart thumping. I want to teach. I feel alive when I'm in a classroom. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. His face told the whole story. "You chose chalk over gold," he muttered, and left the room. From that day forward, every family conversation became an invisible performance. My siblings got applause. I got polite nods. They were building things that made money. I was playing with markers. And yet, I stayed with it. I stayed up late making lesson plans, bought my own classroom supplies with my own meager paycheck, took calls from worried moms at night, and cried in the bathroom when one of my students told me no one had ever told her she was smart before. But none of that made it into the family newsletter. What did? My sister's promotion at the pharmaceutical firm. My brother's engagement to a venture capitalist's daughter. The new beach house in Boca. I became something of a ghost. Present, but not seen. And so, I stopped coming to the dinners. One missed Sunday turned into months. Months into years. No one called to ask why, except once, from a number I didn't recognize. It was a voicemail. A voice. A little nervous. "Ms. Navarro? I don't know if you remember me. It's Devin. Devin Mitchell. From your 7th grade class? I wanted to thank you for what you said that day, when you stayed after class with me. It changed everything." I didn't return the call. I couldn't. My throat clenched too tightly. I hadn't heard that name in nearly 2 decades. I barely remembered the moment. But clearly, he did. And it would turn out, he never forgot. That voicemail would become the quiet seed of something no one could have predicted. Because one day, not long after Dad's heart attack, And long after the family stopped asking about me, an envelope showed up at my door. It didn't have a return address. It wasn't a card. It was heavy. I didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. You chose chalk over gold. I don't think I'll ever forget the way my father said those words, as if I'd thrown away a golden ticket to join the circus. Not chosen a calling, just made a mistake I'd regret for the rest of my life. It was the summer after graduation. I had a full ride to business school waiting. I'd been accepted into a competitive corporate internship at Vectra Capital, where my uncle worked, and everyone expected me to wear pencil skirts, shake hands with CEOs, and bring back honor and bonuses to the Navarro name. Instead, I signed the offer letter for a teaching residency in a school district that made the news for all the wrong reasons: violence, poverty, dropout rates. The pay was shamefully low, the classrooms overcrowded, and the resources practically non-existent. But I couldn't let it go. I had done one semester of student teaching and something lit up in me. I remember standing in front of 22 eighth graders who had seen more in life than most adults, and watching their eyes come alive during a lesson on poetry. Real, raw poetry, like Tupac, Maya Angelou, and Langston Hughes. Their words felt like magic to the kids, and to me. I came home that afternoon and told my parents, cheeks still flushed from the adrenaline. I was certain they'd see what I saw, that I could make a difference, that it meant something. Instead, my mom pursed her lips and said, "You'll never be able to afford a house on a teacher's salary." And my dad just shook his head. "No one with brains works in the public sector, Elise. It's where people go when they give up." That night, I cried into my pillow and told myself I'd prove them wrong. Not with a mansion, not with a stock portfolio, but with a life that meant something. But here's the thing no one tells you. Proving yourself in silence takes a toll, especially when your victories aren't flashy. When there's no applause, no headline, no party. Just you and your students, and the slow, patient growth of seeds no one else sees. I still remember my first year teaching at Westbrook Middle School. The hallways smelled like damp textbooks and cafeteria pizza. The ceilings leaked when it rained. My classroom had graffiti carved into the desks. My roster included a boy whose brother had been shot the week before, a girl who slept in her cousin's car, and another who flinched every time someone raised their voice. I was 23, broke, and terrified. But I was also exactly where I needed to be. Of course, my family didn't see it that way. At Thanksgiving that year, my cousin announced she had passed the bar. The whole table erupted in cheers. When it came to my turn, I shared a story about a student who had written his first essay without giving up halfway. My aunt smiled tightly and said, "That's sweet. That's sweet." Like I was playing dress-up. Like I hadn't just spent 6 hours grading papers and crying over a boy who got suspended for fighting after telling me he only wanted someone to notice he was hurting. The worst part? I started to believe them. I stopped sharing stories, stopped defending my choice. I wore quiet like a coat, smiled through it all. I let them talk over me, around me. At my sister's wedding, I wasn't seated with family. I was placed at the miscellaneous table. I was the only one not mentioned in the speech. But I clapped anyway, held the bouquet, took the photos, played the role. Because that's what you do when you're the disappointment. You stay polite, small, out of the way. Still, every day I returned to the classroom. Every morning I picked up dry markers and broken promises and tried to make magic anyway. And the kids? They saw me. They didn't care that I couldn't afford a new car, that I didn't have a husband or a title or a home in the suburbs. They cared that I remembered their birthdays, that I didn't give up on them, that I came back. Every day, no matter what. One day, Devin Mitchell sat in the back row, quiet, withdrawn. His file said, disruptive, likely to drop out. His eyes said, I dare you to care, so I did. I stayed after class one afternoon, asked him to read a Langston Hughes poem out loud. He said no at first, then whispered the words like they were a secret only he understood. When he finished, I said, You have a voice, Devin. Don't let anyone take it from you. He didn't say anything, but I saw something shift. It was a tiny moment, so small I forgot about it after a few years. Another student, another story, another life I tried to water in a desert of apathy. But apparently, he didn't forget. Years passed. I kept teaching, moved apartments twice, lived paycheck to paycheck, skipped family events, watched my siblings climb the ladder. And then one day, when my father's business imploded and everything started to fall apart, a name from the past would come back with a quiet fury, and my world would finally, irrevocably shift. I don't remember the exact moment I became invisible to my family. Maybe it was gradual, like water eroding stone. One polite dismissal at a time, one awkward silence, one missed birthday. I faded, bit by bit, until I was just a name at the bottom of the group chat, if I was there at all. But the photos were the worst. You'd think it wouldn't matter, but it does. There was one picture that did it for me. It was framed in my mother's hallway. A massive black and white family portrait taken 2 years ago at my cousin Daniel's wedding. Everyone was there, the entire Navarro clan, my parents, my siblings, their spouses and kids, even distant cousins flown in from out of state. Everyone except me. At first I thought I'd just been blocked by someone standing in front of me, but then I looked again. I wasn't there. At all. I wasn't invited. No one had told me the date had changed. No one thought to call. When I brought it up to my sister, half joking, trying not to sound hurt, she blinked and said, Oh, I thought you were busy with school stuff or something. School stuff. A wedding. Our cousin's wedding. And I was omitted like a typo. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just tolerated. I was optional. So I made it easier for them. I stopped sending birthday cards. I skipped the holidays. I let their silence become mutual. And they didn't protest. Not once. Meanwhile, life trudged forward. I changed schools, moving to a magnet program for underserved students. It was harder. The kids came with heavier stories, more walls, more anger. But I loved them. I stopped measuring my worth by family standards and started finding it in small victories, like when Jayla, a 9th grader who hadn't spoken above a whisper all year, stood up and performed her own poem at the school assembly. She shook like a leaf, but she did it. And afterward, she hugged me and cried. I never thought anyone would want to hear me, she whispered. That was my bonus, my validation. But at home, things were unraveling. Dad's construction firm had been struggling for years. There were whispers about back taxes, about a bad deal in Tampa, about investors pulling out. We never discussed it directly, but I'd hear things. Hushed phone calls, urgent emails, the thinning smile on my mother's face. Then, one Sunday, I got a call. It was my sister, voice tight. Dad's in the hospital, heart attack. He's stable, but it's bad. I went, of course. I still cared. You don't unlove someone just because they disappointed you. At the hospital, no one greeted me with hugs, just nods, like I was an outsider who'd shown up out of duty. Mom was pacing, wringing her hands. The business is gone, she muttered when I asked. They're seizing the office next week. He took out a loan against the house. What about Michael or Anna? I asked. Can't they cover it? She looked at me, and I'll never forget the desperation in her voice. They're not liquid right now. It's all tied up. Elise, we need help. It took me a moment to process that sentence. We need help. From me. I teach high school literature. I live in a one-bedroom apartment where the heater only works when it wants to. I have no savings to speak of. I can't fix this, I said softly. I'm sorry. My sister scoffed. Of course not. I told Mom this was pointless. I felt that. Like a slap. They still saw me as the one who had opted out. The failure. The ghost. But life has a funny way of flipping the script when you least expect it. Because 3 weeks later, when the collectors started circling and no one could pay off the debts, someone stepped in. And it wasn't Michael, or Anna, or one of Dad's old partners. It was me. Except I didn't know it yet. It started with a knock at my door and a thick envelope in my mailbox. There was no return address, just my name. Inside, a folded letter, and a cashier's check so large I had to sit down. I blinked, read the name at the bottom of the letter, Devin Mitchell. The letter was short. Ms. Navarro, you told me once that I had a voice. I've never forgotten that. Now it's my turn to remind you of yours. This isn't charity, it's gratitude. Pay off what they owe. Then come see what I've built. My hands were shaking. Devin, my student from over a decade ago, the one with tired eyes and chipped nails, the one everyone said would drop out. He'd remembered. He hadn't just remembered. He'd become someone. Someone powerful enough to write a check that made six-figure debt disappear. And that, somehow, was just the beginning. I read the letter again, then again, as if it might change under my gaze, as if it were too good to be true. Pay off what they owe. It sounded so simple, so impossible. The cashier's check was real. I confirmed it. The bank confirmed it. It was more than enough to settle the liens, the back taxes, even the outstanding medical bills piling up under my father's name. I held that piece of paper like it was made of fire, because I knew what would happen the moment I handed it over. The narrative would change, but not necessarily in the way it should. They'd rewrite the story, bend it, twist it into something they could stomach. They'd say someone saved them. But would they say me? Still, I did it. I walked into the family lawyer's office 2 days later and dropped the check on the table. His eyebrows shot up. This covers it, he murmured. I know. Can I ask, where did it come from? No, I said. You can't. And I left. The news spread fast. I didn't say a word. But the family did. Suddenly, I was back in the group chat. Suddenly, there were messages. Thank you, Elise. We didn't know you had it in you. Maybe teaching pays better than we thought. And just like that, they were rewriting the story. Like I'd won the lottery. Like I'd had some secret nest egg all along. My sister even joked, "Should have been a teacher, huh?" Followed by a line of laughing emojis. They didn't ask how. They didn't ask why. They just assumed. Until one night I got a call from Michael. Hesitant. Almost respectful. Mom says you helped fix everything, he said. I didn't believe her. Silence. Where did the money come from, Elise? I paused. And for the first time in a long time, I felt calm. From someone who believes in what I do. He didn't respond, just exhaled. Later that week, I received an invitation in the mail. An actual envelope, with real cardstock. My name spelled correctly. No jokes in the margins. It was for an event. A keynote speech. Corporate gala. CEO Spotlight Series. The name on the front? Devin Mitchell. The boy who once could barely read a full paragraph without stumbling. Now the man hosting one of the largest tech accelerators on the East Coast. I stood in the back of the conference room, hidden in the shadows of towering suits and designer dresses. The lights dimmed. Music swelled. And Devin walked out. Confident. Tall. In a crisp navy suit that probably cost more than my rent. He didn't look like the boy I remembered, but the moment he opened his mouth, I knew. "I wasn't supposed to be here," he began. "Statistically, I should have dropped out. Ended up another name in a file no one reads." He paused. The room stilled. "But in 7th grade, someone told me I had a voice, that I could use it, that I was worth hearing." My heart stopped. He scanned the audience, found me, pointed. "She's here tonight. Ms. Navarro, my teacher, my lifeline, my reason." People turned, cameras flashed. I wanted to melt into the floor. She didn't just teach me English, she taught me who I could be. The room erupted. Applause, whispers. I think someone near me cried. Maybe it was me. And in that moment, all the Sunday dinners I'd missed, all the cold shoulders, all the birthdays spent alone, melted into something warm and weightless. Devin had seen me, remembered me, not just for a moment, but for a lifetime. I didn't want validation. I hadn't asked for a stage. But standing there, watching a sea of powerful people turn to see the woman who once bought her students notebooks from the dollar store, I felt something shift. I mattered. Not just to a classroom, but to the world my family always said I didn't belong to. That night, I left early. I didn't need the after party. I didn't need the praise. I just needed quiet. And as I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "You must be so proud." I stared at the screen. Not "we're proud," not "I'm proud." You must be. It was still easier for her to keep a distance, to admire from afar. But it was something. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to reply. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting for them to name me. I had already claimed myself. It's strange what an envelope can do. How something as thin as paper, as weightless as ink, can shift the axis of your whole world. After the gala, I returned to my classroom like nothing had happened. I still had 32 students, a broken whiteboard, and a copy machine that jammed every third sheet. But something in me was different. I carried myself differently. Not with pride, exactly, but with certainty. Certainty that I was no longer waiting to be seen. The news of Devin's tribute traveled faster than I expected. Not just in tech circles, where headlines like "CEO credits middle school teacher for his success" made the rounds, but also, reluctantly, in my own family. Suddenly, the same people who had dismissed my work were bragging about me. My aunt told her church friends, "Our Elise is the one Devin Mitchell mentioned. You know, the app guy." My sister posted a throwback photo of us as kids with the caption, "So proud of my brilliant sister for shaping the future." It would have been flattering, if it didn't sting so much. Where were these words when I was eating ramen 4 nights a week to afford classroom books? When I was alone on Christmas? When I cried quietly in the teacher's lounge after a student told me his mom was arrested the night before? They celebrated the spotlight, not the sacrifice. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, is that Devin's gesture didn't stop at a speech or a check. A few days after the gala, a car pulled up outside my school. It was sleek, black, the kind that hums instead of growls. Devin stepped out, a little awkward now, like he wasn't used to standing this close to his past. "Ms. Navarro," he said, eyes crinkling into a smile. "Can I take you to lunch?" I laughed. "As long as it's not in that car. I'd spill soup on the seats." He chuckled and nodded. "Fair enough. Walk with me?" So we did. Through the park across from the school, past the swings and the duck pond and the tiny bridge where kids carved initials into the railings. "I meant what I said," he said quietly, "about you saving my life." I looked at him. "Devin, I stayed after class with you one day. Gave you some poetry. That's hardly—" He stopped walking. "No, it wasn't just one day. It was every day. You saw me when no one else did. You saw potential when I only saw failure. You stayed patient when I was angry. And you gave me language, Miss Navarro. That's everything. You gave me a way to name what I felt. A way to fight without using fists. I felt my throat tighten. After you, I started writing. Journals. Lyrics. Letters to my future self. I started dreaming in full sentences. I didn't know what to say, so he kept talking. I want to fund a program, he said. In your name. For teachers like you. For classrooms like yours. I froze. I don't want to change the system from above. I want to go back into it. With people who never left. Will you help me build it? I could barely nod. We spent the rest of the afternoon sketching out ideas on napkins and phone notes. A mentorship network. A fund for classroom supplies. A scholarship named after my late grandmother, because I told him she was the only one who supported my dream back then. And as the sun dipped low, Devin turned to me with a crooked smile. You know, your family doesn't deserve you. I laughed. It was the kind of laugh that catches in your chest, somewhere between agreement and mourning. No, I said, but I'm not doing this for them. I went home that night to a dozen new voicemails from my mother, my brother, my cousin. All of them wanted to catch up. All of them so proud. But they weren't proud of me. They were proud of being associated with me. There's a difference. And I was finally ready to name it, so I didn't answer the calls. Instead, I sat at my tiny kitchen table, opened my laptop, and began drafting the first outline for the program Devin and I had discussed. I titled the folder, The Quiet Work, because that's what teaching had always been. Quiet, unseen, and yet powerful enough to shake the ground. The next morning, I arrived at school before sunrise, coffee in hand, and taped a new quote to the whiteboard. You may not see the harvest, but that doesn't mean the seed was wasted. Devin had been a seed, and now he was planting more. And I had never been more certain of my worth, even if it took the world a little too long to catch up. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, just after my last period. I was wiping down desks with the last of the Clorox wipes when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, but then it buzzed again, and again. I sighed and answered. Hello? Elise? My mother's voice was strained. Can you come to the hospital? My heart sank. Is it Dad? He's stable, but he's asking for you. Those were words I hadn't expected to hear in this lifetime. I arrived 30 minutes later. He was pale, frail, and hooked to more machines than I could name. His hair had thinned, and the sharpness in his voice was gone, replaced by something ragged and unsure. Elise, he said, his voice raspy. You really did it. I sat beside him, unsure whether to feel vindicated or heartbroken. I don't understand, he went on. All this time, how did I not see? I looked at him for a long moment. Because you didn't want to. Because I didn't come wrapped in titles and trophies. He closed his eyes, and for a moment I thought he might drift off. But then he whispered, I'm sorry. 2 words. Late. Soft. But they landed with a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. I know, I said. We sat in silence. The beeping of the monitors filled the space where words might have gone. I didn't need a grand confession. I didn't want him to grovel. I just wanted the truth to sit between us, unhidden for once. He opened his eyes again and asked, Who is he? Devin Mitchell, I said. 7th grade, you never asked me about him. Or any of them. He swallowed. What did you say to him? I smiled faintly. That he had a voice. That he should use it. Dad blinked, eyes glistening. That's all? That's everything. He nodded slowly like the lesson had finally reached him, decades too late, but somehow right on time. When I left the room, my sister was waiting in the hallway. He's been talking about you nonstop, she said. Like, Proud talk. I think he finally gets it. I looked at her. Do you? She hesitated. I don't know. I think I'm trying. Fair enough. That Sunday, I received another invitation. This time, it was from Devon's team, a community gala. Devon's new nonprofit, Voices Rising, was launching officially. Scholarships, mentorship, literacy grants, teacher fellowships. All under one mission: honor the quiet work. I wasn't just invited, I was listed as co-founder. I didn't tell my family, I didn't need them there. But they came anyway. I arrived early, nerves buzzing under my skin. The room was warm with string lights and soft music, teachers, students, community leaders, and press. And Devon, beaming, grounded, unmistakably changed. When it was time for the keynote, I was prepared for him to take center stage. But instead, he pulled me aside and whispered, "This time, it's your voice they need to hear." I froze. "I can't," I whispered. "I don't do speeches." "Yes," he said. "You do. You've been doing them for years. Just not with microphones." He walked me to the podium, gave me a nod, and stepped back. The room quieted. I looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, many not, and for the first time, I didn't shrink. I used to think that if people didn't clap, I hadn't done anything worth celebrating, I began. But the truth is, some work, the most important work, happens in silence. I told them about Devon, about Jayla, about all the kids whose names never made the news but who carried their stories like fire inside them. I told them about being invisible and still showing up, about being mocked and still choosing to care. I ended with this. Teaching isn't what I do because I couldn't do something else. It's what I do because I couldn't not. Because I believe in the ripple. Because sometimes the smallest voice creates the loudest echo. And because someone, somewhere, is always listening, even if they wait 10 years to say thank you. When I stepped down, the room stood. But the applause didn't matter. Not really. What mattered was the look on Devon's face, and the single tear I saw slide down my mother's cheek in the second row. Maybe now she saw, not just what I'd become, but who I'd always been. The phone calls from my family changed after that night. They used to feel like obligations, thinly veiled in politeness. Now they sounded like invitations, real ones, not for status, not to check a box, but because they were curious, humbled. My sister called one evening just as I was packing up my classroom after parent-teacher night. "I read the article in the Chronicle," she said. "They quoted your whole speech. You sounded like someone I want to learn from." I didn't know what to say. For so long I had been on the outside. Their world had been too loud for mine. Now, it was quiet enough for them to finally hear. My brother was next. He sent me an email. He never calls. Attached was a photo of his 2 young daughters, sitting on the floor reading The House on Mango Street. They asked why their books don't have more teachers in them, he wrote. I told them I'd introduce them to the best one I know. I cried at my desk. But it wasn't the validation that moved me. It was the shift. They were no longer asking me to fit their mold. They were looking at the cracks in theirs. Still, not everything was mended. Dad came home from the hospital, thinner, slower. He'd aged 10 years in a matter of weeks. And though the debt was gone and the house was safe, something inside him hadn't healed. One afternoon, I visited while Mom was out grocery shopping. We sat in the kitchen, the old one I used to sneak snacks from when I was 10, and he stared at his coffee for a long time. I was raised to believe that success had a shape, he said slowly. It wore a tie, drove a certain car, spoke with a firm handshake. He looked at me then. But you built something better, quieter. But it held. It held when mine collapsed. I wanted to be angry, to tell him it was too late, but the truth is, he looked more like a child than a father in that moment. Confused, a little ashamed. So I said nothing. I just reached for his hand and he let me. We sat like that for a long time, and for once, the silence between us wasn't absence. It was understanding. Later that night, as I drove home, I passed by Westbrook Middle School, the first school I ever taught at. It was nearly dusk. The windows glowed faintly, and I could see silhouettes of the janitor mopping the hallway, the last of the after-school kids waiting for rides. I parked across the street and just watched. That building had changed me. It had broken me too, more than once. But it also rebuilt me into something stronger. I gave pieces of myself to those classrooms, pieces I didn't know I could spare. But somehow, what I gave came back. Not in applause, not in trophies, in lives, in letters, in the way one student came back with a check that erased my family's shame, but also in smaller ways. In the girl who learned to speak up, the boy who stopped skipping, the kid who whispered, "Thank you," on the last day of school, and meant it with his whole heart. They were my legacy. And no one, no silence, no omission, no erased family photo, could ever take that from me. Still, one piece of me remained unsettled. They had asked for forgiveness, but had they earned it? At the next family dinner, I found out. It was a modest affair, not the usual overdone buffet. Just a roast chicken, some mashed potatoes, and all of us seated around a too small table that forced closeness. Dad raised his glass. "To Elise," he said, "for saving us." I shook my head. "Don't." He blinked. "Why not?" "Because I didn't do it for you." The air went still. "I did it because I've always believed in people, even when they don't believe in me, even when they laugh, even when they erase me from photos." Mom lowered her eyes. My sister looked away. "I didn't need your validation to matter, but I think you needed to lose everything to see what I've had all along." No one spoke, until my niece, 8 years old, missing her front teeth, piped up from the corner, "I want to be a teacher like Aunt Elise." And just like that, the tension cracked. My mother started crying. My father whispered, "I'm proud of you," like he'd been rehearsing it for years. My sister reached across the table and held my hand. It wasn't perfection, but it was honest, and I could live with that. I host dinner now, not every Sunday, just once a month. But it's mine, and the table is different. It's not long and showy with glittering crystal or overpriced centerpieces. It's round, wooden, a little scuffed from years of classroom use. I actually rescued it from a school that was closing due to budget cuts. I like it that way. It has history, imperfection, like me. And around that table, I've begun to gather the people who've always seen me. Not just family by blood, but family by choice. Devin comes when he's in town. Jayla, now a high school junior and poetry slam finalist, brought her mom once, and we all cried over lasagna. Mr. Coates, my old mentor teacher from Westbrook, still brings a bottle of sparkling cider and bad jokes. Sometimes my mother comes. Quiet, more observant now. She asks questions about my students. She helps clean up without being asked. My father hasn't been well enough to come yet, but he calls me every week. He listens now, not to reply, but to understand. We've found something close to peace, not because we erased the past, but because we stopped pretending it never happened. And my siblings, they're learning. Anna, my sister, helped fund the second round of Voices Rising scholarships. Michael offered legal guidance on the nonprofit filings. They're no longer trying to shape me into one of them. Instead, they're asking how they can support what I've built. I never asked for that. But maybe I finally allowed space for it. The last dinner I hosted was quiet. Devin had flown in just for the evening, and as he stood at the counter helping me dry dishes, he said, "You know, I still have that essay you made us write about finding your voice. You circled the word remember 5 times in red ink." I smiled. "You kept that?" "Framed it," he said. "Put it on my desk, right next to the patent award." We laughed. Not the polite kind, the deep, healed kind. Later, when the last guest had left and the dishes were drying in the rack, I sat down at the table alone, looked around at the empty chairs. Not empty in the way they once were, but waiting, welcoming. I pulled out a small leather journal, one of the dozens I've filled over the years, and began to write. Today, I remembered that some seeds bloom late, but when they do, they bloom wildly, unapologetically, and right where they were planted. Today I was reminded that being mocked doesn't mean you're wrong. It often means you're early. And today, I finally believed I was never invisible, just underestimated. I closed the journal, looked at the clock. Nearly midnight. Outside, the street was quiet, moonlight brushing the tops of parked cars. A cool breeze slipped through the slightly cracked window. And in that moment, I realized I no longer needed the world to cheer for me. I had learned to cheer for myself, because I had done the quiet work, the soul work, the kind that doesn't come with medals but moves mountains anyway, because I chose teaching, not for status, but for impact. Because I planted truth in a field of doubt, and one of those seeds? He came back, with a check, with a voice, with a legacy of his own. They mocked me for choosing teaching, but now they sit at my table, and they listen. End of story. Thank you for listening to my journey.